live presentation is why your back pain isn't going away. Now, we did a video yesterday about the amazing scientific research that offers hope for back pain, and it was a little confusing. And I thought about it, I thought, why was that confusing? It was confusing because you need to really understand why you have back pain that's not going away. And then it helps you better understand the research and what the research identified, because it's a breakthrough. And it's going to transform the industry. My goal is to eliminate back pain. My goal is to eliminate all back pain. And I believe that it can be done. The reason we do what we do at the Illinois Back Institute is because of something that happened to me. I hurt my back when I was in college, and what I did is I jammed my disc. This is a healthy disc here, and this is a really unhealthy disc, and I squashed the disc in my back. I found a way out, and I had severe back pain every day for many years, and my back pain was up to an 8 on a scale of 1 to 10, and I was able to find a way out. And I'm able to do all the things that I want to do. I can golf, I can do taekwondo, which is a martial art. I'm a 4th degree black belt. And I can do all the things that I couldn't do before. And I found a way out. So what we do at the Illinois Back Institute is we do a very specific protocol. And that protocol was part of the research. And it really is a breakthrough. So I'm going to talk to you about why you have back pain that's not going away. This one's going to be a little bit longer than normal because this takes a little bit of time. But if you suffer from a herniated disc, a bulging disc, a degenerated disc, stenosis, spondylolisthesis, and or sciatica, this video is about you. This video is for you. This will help you because this is all about the why you have the problem. Because when you understand why you have the problem and really where the pain is coming from, then you'll understand a little bit more about the study that was performed. Typical spine. We're going to talk about the spine, and then we'll talk about what happens to the spine. And the what happens to the spine is the why you have the back pain that's not going away. Typical spine looks like this. The head's up here, the hips are down here. There's 24 vertebrae between the head and the hips. The vertebrae are the bones. In between each bone there is a disc. The disc allows for motion of the vertebrae. Each vertebrae is designed to move in 6 directions: forward, back, side to side, and rotate. And all that motion takes place on top of the disc. Inside the spine is the spinal cord. The head's up here. Off the head, inside the head is the brain. Off the brain is the brainstem, and then the spinal cord runs down through the inside of the spine. The spine is designed to protect the spinal cord. So the spinal cord's on the inside of the spine, and the spinal cord is in there protecting by the bones. In between each vertebrae, there is a nerve that exits directly off of the spinal cord through an opening called the foramen. And the nerves in the neck go into the arms, and the nerves in the low back go down the legs. There are very small little joints on the back of the vertebrae called facet joints. They're little joints in the back, in between each vertebrae. They guide the motion of the joint. They're guiding motion joints. They're not necessarily weight-bearing joints. The disc is really designed to bear the weight. The disc is designed the way it is to bear the weight. And the disc is, if you have back pain that's going away, bulging disc, degenerated disc, herniated disc, stenosis, typically it's the result of this disc right here. Breaking down. It's the breakdown process. Now the nerves in the neck go into the arms. If you've ever had a pinched nerve in your neck, very often you'll have pain in the neck. Sometimes you'll have headaches, pain that goes up to the head. Sometimes you'll have pain that goes down the shoulder. Same thing in the low back. Nerves in the low back go down the legs. If you've ever had a pinched nerve in your low back, very often you'll have pain in the back. Sometimes pain that goes into the hip. Sometimes you'll have pain that goes all the way down into the foot. The sciatic nerve is the largest nerve in your body, and there are nerves that exit off of the spinal cord in the lowest part of your spine, and these nerves exit through the foramen. and they form together into one nerve that goes down the leg. It's the largest nerve in your body, and when it gets pinched, it hurts, and it hurts a lot. I know because I have had it. Now the disc. If you have back pain that's not going away, you have a problem in your disc. The disc is breaking down. The breakdown process is typically what causes you the back pain. The disc is a lot like a jelly donut in the sense that the outside of the disc there's a thick material, and inside the disc there's a jelly-like substance. So one vertebrae on top of the other with the disc in between. This is the annulus on the outer portion, and the nucleus is on the inner portion. The nucleus gives stability to the disc the same way air gives stability to your tire. When the tire has the proper amount of air, the tire functions normally and it's more stable. And when the nucleus is well hydrated, it functions normally and gives stability to the outer portion of the disc. When the stresses are distributed evenly through the nucleus, this is the nucleus, the stresses will be distributed evenly in all directions on the annulus. Sometimes what happens is the angle of the load can disrupt and or force all the pressure into one portion of the annulus, and the annulus under too much pressure for too long starts to break down. So the nucleus is very important for the distribution of stresses equally in all directions on the annulus. The disc is the largest avascular structure on the body. It's the largest structure on the body that does not have a vein or an artery that goes through it. It's under too much pressure. I weigh 200 pounds. In an upright position, I'll have about 120 pounds of pressure on my disc. Too much pressure to get the blood to flow in and out. It's kind of like stepping on your garden hose. Step on the garden hose, you're not going to get the water to flow. Same thing with the disc. The disc has a lot of pressure on it, and under all that pressure, you're not going to get the proper flow. So the disc relies on a network of arteries that runs up and down the outside. And the network of arteries that runs up and down the outside supplies the outer 1/3 of the annulus the oxygen and nutrients necessary through the blood flow. So it happens with this artery. There's an artery that runs through the inside of the vertebrae, and the artery that runs through the inside of the vertebrae supplies the oxygen and nutrients across the end plate of the vertebrae into the disc. More importantly, into the inside 2/3 of the disc where the nucleus is. This end plate of the vertebrae relies on motion. So you need some motion between the vertebrae to get the proper flow in and out. When you don't get the proper motion, you decrease the ability for the fluids to flow in and out. And when you decrease the ability for the fluid to flow in and out, the nucleus starts to dry out. And the drying out of the nucleus is the degenerated disc. So it's very important that you get the proper flow of oxygen and nutrients. When you don't get the proper flow, the nucleus starts to dry out. And when the nucleus starts to dry out, the outer portion of the annulus starts to bear more load. And when the annulus bears more load, it starts to break down. When the center of gravity goes directly through the middle of the nucleus, you'll distribute stresses evenly on the annulus. What happens sometimes is the angle of the vertebrae shifts, or your posture shifts, and it changes the load, or through repetitive motion you change the load, and what it does is it forces all the load into one portion of the annulus. And as that annulus under all that load starts to break down, it'll start to develop a tear in the annulus. So you'll get a little tear in the outer portion of the annulus. So here's the annulus, here's the nucleus, you get what's called a little fissure. Okay, that fissure will allow for the nucleus to push out. As the nucleus starts to push out, it looks like this from the top view. Here's the outer portion is the annulus, the nucleus is on the inside. As you get that little tear, the nucleus starts to push out. And as it starts to push out, very often you'll develop a bulging disc. And over time, as it tears even further and becomes more focal, the focal point now becomes a herniated disc. So the disc starts to herniate under the load. It's the breakdown of the disc that causes the back pain that doesn't go away. Over time, what can happen is the annulus can tear all the way through and the nucleus can push to the outside. And as it pushes to the outside, That's an extrusion, where the nucleus has actually come out of the annulus all the way to the outside. And that, over time, will start to push into the spinal canal. This is an MRI. You can see the herniated disc on the MRI. The MRI is very important for looking at the disc. Typically, a smooth transition from one vertebrae to the next is what you want. You can see down here, nucleus is pushing out into the spinal canal. That's the herniated disc. You can physically see it on an MRI. So the question is, why does all this happen? How does it start? Well, there's different reasons. The most common reason is a trauma. Now, I had a trauma. I jumped off a cliff into 80-foot cliff into water, and what I did is I landed in a way where I jammed my low back. What I did is I didn't smash it, but I really did a lot of damage to my disc. So for me, it was a trauma that was very memorable because it hurt a lot, and it hurt for years, this trauma I had. I eventually found my way out, which is kind of why we do what we do here, which is unique. But in my case, I had a trauma. I jammed it. So traumas tend to be the most common. Mine was very memorable. Sometimes they're not always memorable. Sometimes it's a slip and fall down the stairs, or slip and fall on the ice. Car accidents, a very common form of trauma. Sports injuries, a very common form of trauma. We treat a lot of professional athletes, a lot of former Chicago Bears. Okay, all the football players have a lot of trauma to their spine, years and years and years of trauma. And that trauma adds up. It's not the only reason, it's the most common reason. Another reason is what we call repetitive stress. Repetitive stress is where you do the same thing every day. Bending, lifting, twisting. Lifting, twisting. Ben just broke his back. Bending, lifting, twisting. Causes a breakdown of the disc. Causes an increase of load, causes the annulus to start to tear, causes the nucleus to start to dry out, causes a whole host of problems all within the disc. That's repetitive stress. Another one is poor posture. What they found is when the center of gravity goes directly through the middle of the spine, the stresses are distributed evenly in all directions on the annulus. But what happens, we live in a culture where we sit a lot, and now we're all on our phones, and we're all on our laptops, and we lean forward, and what it does is it forces the center of gravity in front of the spine. And what they found, is a 1 inch forward lean puts the center of gravity in front of the spine by 1 inch, and that loads the disc at the very bottom by 4 times normal. And it's enough load on that disc to cause that disc to herniate. So your posture has a direct effect on the health and your stability and your pain in your spine. So posture is very, very, very important. Another reason is what we call deconditioning syndrome. Deconditioning syndrome is where the muscles go out of balance. Muscles are designed to be in balance around your core. Okay? The way it works is when you lift up something with your arm and your bicep contracts, as the bicep contracts, the muscle in the back relaxes. That's what allows joints to move. One gets tight, one gets loose. It's called reciprocal inhibition. What happens over time, if one muscle is tight for too long, the muscle that does the opposite activity gets loose. When the muscles in the back get tight after an injury, the muscles in the front slowly start to turn off neurologically. It's called deconditioning syndrome, altered reciprocal inhibition. Muscles go out of balance, they become deconditioned. So tight muscles in the back cause the muscles in the front to turn off. It happens side to side, it can happen front to back, depending on which muscles are affected, but it can also happen in the hips. So when the muscles go out of balance, what happens is it changes the load on the disc. Tight muscles in the back, loose muscles in the front, loads the posterior aspect of the disc. And that posterior aspect of the disc will start to break down under the load. Deconditioning syndrome, altered reciprocal inhibition. Also what happens when the disc starts to break down and it starts to get thinner and you're getting the degenerated disc, it changes the biomechanics, both at that joint and the joint above and the joint below. And when you increase or change the load of the biomechanics above and below, those start to break down. So once one starts to break down, very often it leads to the other discs starting to break down. We talked a little bit about the football players, all the traumas they had, but here's what the degenerated disc looks like. Healthy disc looks like this. One vertebrae on top of the other, healthy disc in between. Hard to see this shiny nucleus, and the lighting's not so good in here, but the nucleus is shiny because it has fluid in it. Typically enough space. Healthy disc, the vertebrae are further apart. But what happens as the disc starts to dry out is the vertebrae physically get closer together. As they physically get closer together, it starts to compress the outer portion of the annulus, and the annulus starts to break down. And in some cases, as that annulus starts to break down, it's an inflammatory process. The inflammation causes pain. So the breakdown process, if the spine is unstable or overloaded from altered reciprocal inhibition or posture or all the things you do on a daily basis, you will get a lot of inflammation, both in the disc, and very often you'll get what's called inflammation in the end plate of the vertebrae. It's called modic change. You'll get modic change as a result of the disc starting to degenerate. But also what happens as that's going on is you start to get the space where the nerve comes out starts to physically get smaller. And as that space physically gets smaller, it starts to compress the nerve. So the bulging disc can compress the nerve. The herniated disc can compress the nerve. The thinning of the disc, that degenerative disc, will start to compress the nerve. Those will all start to cause some sciatica, but more importantly, it'll cause back pain. If the spine is unstable, things are out of balance, muscles aren't doing what they should be doing, and the nervous system's not telling the muscles what to do, you will get an unstable spine that'll become very painful. And it's through this breakdown process in the disc that you start to develop both stenosis, and maybe I didn't mention that. So the narrowing of the space as the disc physically gets smaller will start to cause that space where the nerve to come out get smaller. It's called foraminal stenosis. But also what it'll do, it'll compress the inside of the spinal canal, causing canal stenosis. So it's the breakdown process of the disc that causes all the back trouble. Over time, what will happen is you'll get less fluid into the nucleus. Now you can physically see a healthy nucleus on an MRI. MRI, healthy nucleus will be white on the inside. Okay, the whiteness is the fluid. This is a T2 sagittal view of an MRI. You can see a healthy nucleus. Looks like this. When you get the proper flow, it looks like this. Over time, as it dries out, it physically gets darker. Looks like this. Same thing here. So you've got one healthy, two degenerated. This one's bulging, and this one's actually herniated. You can see a little bit of nuclear material here, but it's starting to dry out. So two degenerated discs, one's bulging, one's herniated. And that herniation, the nucleus will start to migrate out through the fissure. Now we talked a little bit about the joints in the back. The joints in the back are the facet joints. They guide motion of the vertebrae. As the disc starts to break down and the vertebrae get closer together, you start to overload the facet joints. Facet joints are not designed to bear weight. The disc is designed to bear weight. The disc is like a jelly donut. The jelly donut can bear more weight than the facet joints. Facet joints under too much load start to break down, and when the first thing that happens when they break down is the cartilage breaks down, and that's an inflammatory process, and then the bone starts to break down. It's arthritic facet joints. It's the degenerative joint disease. Over time, you get the arthritis of the spine, and the arthritis is the breakdown of the joint under the load. So what causes back pain? The disc causes back pain. The facet joint causes back pain. And the longer you have the problem, the more breakdown you get. And it's this breakdown process that causes the back pain. What do chiropractors do? Chiropractors work with the joints. Physical therapists work with the muscles. But there is no therapy that works directly with the disc. And this is part of the breakthrough, the scientific breakthrough that was published in the medical journal. Okay? We call this the degenerative cascade. It's the slow breakdown process of the spine after an injury. It doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes it does, but mostly it takes time. Okay? It's also called the pain cycle. Now, I jumped off a cliff, smashed my low back, jammed my sacrum into my L5 vertebrae. Instantly I had pain, memorable, and I had some inflammation because I damaged tissues and it caused some stiffness in the muscles. Muscles start to guard. Why do they guard? Well, they guard to prevent you from moving into positions that makes it worse. So I had some immobilization. Over time, what happens when one muscle gets tight, the muscle that does the opposite activity starts to get loose. Reciprocal inhibition. One muscle's tight, one muscle's loose. Got to work the core. That's why you have to work the core, because you have to balance the muscles out. When the muscles are out of balance, then you have a problem. This tight muscle and the adaptation causes a slow shrinking of the capsule around the joint. And that shrinking of the capsule around the joint causes a stiffness in the joint. And that stiffness in the joint prevents motion of the vertebrae. And the longer you prevent the motion of the vertebrae, the less fluid you get to flow into the disc. And that slow breakdown over time, which is what causes the back pain. Now, it's not uncommon that if you catch this soon enough, chiropractic and physical therapy can get rid of it. But if you don't catch it soon enough, what happens is you start to increase the pressure on the cartilage, increase the pressure on the disc, decrease the flow in and out of the disc starts to break down under the load. And the process keeps going like this. And the longer this goes on, the more the disc degenerates, the more likely you are to have the bulging disc, the more likely you are to have the herniated disc, and the more likely you are to have a spine that becomes unstable. It no longer functions the way it should, and you continue to get the breakdown. Now, the longer this is breaking down, the more degenerative disc you have. And the more degenerated you have, the more likely you are to have back pain that doesn't go away. What we do at the Illinois Back Institute addresses this issue of the degenerative cascade. Okay? So if you've been through physical therapy and didn't get better, and you've been through chiropractic and didn't get better, and potentially you've had surgery and didn't get better, or you had the shots, okay, it's because this issue is going on. We have the ability to resolve this issue. The scientific study that I talked about yesterday that I think I made very confusing, and we're going to redo that so it's less confusing. You need to understand what we're doing. We address the disc, and by addressing the disc, the pain goes away. That is what we do. We have the ability. This is a herniated disc. This is a very large herniated disc with, one severely degenerated, one severely herniated. Patient had 8 years of back pain before he came to see us. He'd failed physical therapy, chiropractic, injections, and everything else. Came in, went through our program, and we addressed the disc. And patient went through the therapy. At the end of it, the pain went away. So we have the ability to address the disc. And we score this using the Oswestry Disability Index. The Oswestry Disability Index is what they use to score any therapy to see how much you improve. And this is what was in the study. So when we talk about the study again, we're going to talk about the Oswestry Disability Index. It's the amount of disability you have as a result of your back pain. All right. This one was long, and maybe the longest one we've ever done, certainly the longest one since yesterday, because we haven't done two. We haven't done them for a long time. So it's important to understand what it is that we treat. We treat the dysfunction in the disc. If you like what you hear, I want you to subscribe or like our Facebook page. And we have videos, a lot of videos on YouTube. So if you want to subscribe to our YouTube channel, we have a lot of videos there, and we have Instagram and Twitter. But the videos are on YouTube and Facebook. So having said that, I'm out for today. I know it was a long one, 33 minutes. That's the longest one maybe we ever did. But it's important that you know what we do. So when we talk about the study, and I think every time I talk about the study, I'm going to refer back to this video, because you have to understand what happens to the disc and what happens to your spine, because when you understand that, it makes it easier for you to make better decisions about how to treat it. So that's it. I'm done. Till tomorrow, although I'm not sure what time tomorrow, but tomorrow. So I'm out. Have a good night. Be safe. Go to our pages.